I've spent the past week testing out the Odin, an Android-based handheld with a Snapdragon 845 processor. Does it live up to the hype? Let's find out in this review. We'll start with the unboxing, and there's not very much inside here. There's the handheld itself, a USB-A to USB-C cable, and some instructions. I got the base model, and we'll talk about why I got that in just a second. One important point is that there is no wall charger, and the manual says it supports quick charge 3, 4, and 4+. I would definitely be trying to use a strong recent mobile phone charger in the range of 15 to 20 watts to get the best charging times. Let's talk about the specs first before we talk about the build quality. The processor is a Snapdragon 845 which sports 4 Cortex A75 cores up to 2.8 GHz and 4 Cortex A75 cores up to 1.7 GHz. The GPU is an Adreno 630 at 787 MHz. The base Odin model comes with 4 GB of LPDDR4 RAM and 64 GB of storage, while the Pro model comes with 8 GB of LPDDR4 RAM and 128 GB of storage. The base was supposed to come with a 5000 mAh battery, while the Pro had a 6000 mAh battery. However, because of sourcing issues, they ended up shipping a 6000 mAh battery for all models. It's possible they revert back to the 5000 mAh battery, so just keep that in mind when purchasing. The screen is one of its best features, and it's a 6-inch 1080p 16:9 ratio IPS screen. Dreamcast, PS2 games, and Gamecube games really shine on a screen like this. The speakers are amazing and is better than anything that's ever been put into a handheld before. It's loud, clear, and as good as the audio on more expensive laptops. There's 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi, and we'll test out Moonlight streaming later in this video. Now, you can still buy an Odin on Indiegogo, and they're still selling by demand. Their next shipment, I believe, will be in Q2, but you should double check that with the updates on their Indiegogo page. There are 3 models available: the Odin Lite, which sports a Dimensity D900 at $199, the Odin Base at $240, and the Odin Pro at $290. The Super Dock by itself is $50. There's also an Odin Base Super Pack which comes with a handheld and accessories for $300, and the Odin Pro Super Pack for $360. When it comes to choosing between the Lite, Base, and Pro version, it's difficult to say right now which option is the best because the Lite isn't out yet. So theoretically speaking, the Lite actually has a better single core score than the Base and the Pro, and the multi-core scores are actually very similar. But in practice, in terms of game performance, it can actually vary depending on a number of factors, including the synthetic performance that we just talked about, and also on the GPU drivers and whether it scales well across multiple cores and threads, and also the thermal performance of the handheld itself. But putting all that aside, if I were to guess right now, I would say that the Base and the Pro probably has better game performance, and there might be edge cases where the Lite is better. Between the Base and the Pro, the choice is a little simpler. For Gen 6 emulation and below, that's PS2 and below, you're very unlikely to go over 4 GB of RAM, and game performance is the same on the internal storage and micro SD card slot, so if you're only emulating games on Android, the Base can save you some money, which is what I did. For Android games, from what I've seen in videos, it seems to play a vast majority of Android games, and you can check AYN's official YouTube channel as well to see what games run on the Odin handheld. If you want to use Windows and Android together, you may want to consider the Pro model. Right now, you can't partition the storage, so it's either Windows or Android, but it should be doable later via an update. And 64 GB of storage isn't very much for both Windows and Android. While the install size for Windows is about 20 GB, Microsoft can push fairly large updates as well, so it's going to be a hassle to manage. This is a graph showing benchmarks and price, and as you can see, the Odin Base is very good value based on the specs. It's about the same price as an Ambinic RG552 and has a way better processor, and I feel the build quality on the Odin is much better as well. Compared to the $170 PowerKitty X18S with the Odin Base, you're also getting more power, and when it comes to build quality, there's no comparison here. The Odin trounces the X18S. That said, the Odin is still not as powerful as some of the higher priced mobile phones out there, so if you want to play an even larger selection of PS2 games, you have to jump up to the Poco F3 with the Snapdragon 870, but that's going to cost you around $400. As I said, the Odin has superb build quality and materials, so let's take a look at that. It uses Switch analog sticks, which are now my favorite analog sticks. The D-pad has a nice feel to it as well, particularly for people who like it a little bit looser. The face buttons are literally perfect, requiring just the right amount of force to use them. There are stacked shoulder buttons as well, which is nice. The L2 and R2 are analog and feel good to use. However, from a PS2 perspective, it does feel a bit weird as you have to press it a fair way down. There's also 2 extra paddle buttons on the back, and I'm happy that we have extra buttons to customize. In terms of buttons and ports, there's a power button and volume up and down button on the top, as well as SD card and HDMI port. There's a 3.5mm headphone jack on the bottom, as well as a USB-C charging port. I do think the 3.5mm port should have been at the top so it's not blocked when using the dock. There's been some controversy surrounding the L1 and R1 button issue, so let's talk about it briefly here, and I'll also be doing a separate video on this going into more detail as well. So this is an issue that AYN picked up and has been discussing with the community via updates. The L1 R1 buttons when pushed down has a force reacting at the impact point, and there's potential for the L1 R1 to break if too much force is applied. Now AYN's update says that it can sustain 5 kilograms, so you would think that would be enough for most playstyles. I also did a teardown of the Nintendo Switch Lite here just to show you what it should look like, and you can see here the L1 R1 is protected by a spring and also a plastic part of the shell casing. So what this seems to me is that the Switch is a better design, and AYN should have just copied this design. Right now we don't know how serious this is, so I think we need to wait a few months for user feedback. Now AYN has mentioned the following in a recent Q&A session on Discord. First, the issue is mostly limited to backers for the first 1200 orders. From orders since then, they made quality control improvements such as higher quality control on rubber pads. Secondly, for the second batch of orders, which are the in-demand orders, they've made design changes, and I'll go through these in a separate video. AYN is also supplying L1 R1 repair kits for users that also need to repair their buttons as well. It's kind of hard to say whether there's a deal breaker or not, because I think it's going to depend on your own playstyle and whether you can manage the issue. For me, having used it for the past week or so, I think I would have to put some serious force into it if I were to break it, so I think I can manage the issue okay. Now, for people who have ordered it already, well, you really have 2 choices. You can either send it back or you can manage it yourself by not using so much force. And for people who are interested in ordering, well, you're going to be in the second batch of orders anyway, and there's going to be some design improvements, so hopefully that's going to make it a little bit better. In terms of size, this is very similar to the Switch Lite, but it is a little bit heavier, weighing in at 399 grams. The Switch Lite is 280 grams, and you can definitely feel the difference in terms of materials used and finish. The Odin is very comfortable to hold, especially when using the left analog stick and face buttons. It's molded on the back of the device to make it a little bit easier to hold, and it helps a little bit, but it's not essential. I actually find the GameSir X2 controller fits the shape of my hands more, while the molded areas on the Odin are a little bit small. The screen is one of the best parts about the Odin. Like the Ambinic RG552, this is simply one of the best screens on a retro handheld. I find the Ambinic RG552 great, though it can be a little bit red at times, but I'm really happy about the colors on the Odin. One thing that really surprised me was the battery life. Firstly, it rarely drops charge overnight, maybe losing 1 or 2% at most. It's better than most mobile phones. Secondly, battery performance in emulation gaming is simply excellent. In general play during the week, I got about 7 hours of gaming on one charge. Here's my Wipeout Pulse PSP test compared to the PowerKitty X18S and the Ambinic RG552. One unique feature the Odin has is that it has really simple overclocking and fan controls. There's 3 modes: standard, performance, and high performance, which varies the GPU frequency. On standard mode, the GPU frequency is limited to 710 MHz and the processor will throttle after it reaches 48 degrees Celsius. On performance mode, the processor throttles at 75 degrees Celsius. Finally, there's also high performance mode, and the GPU boosts to 787 MHz, but you need fan speed on sport or adaptive mode. There are 4 fan modes: off, quiet, sport, and adaptive. Quiet is pretty much inaudible, but you can feel the air coming out the vents at the top. For sport mode, you can hear it in a quiet room, but not with earphones, even with lower volume. And adaptive mode adjusts according to the game. During high performance mode, even at 75 degrees Celsius, I never noticed the handheld getting that hot, and I would say this stays cooler or as cool as a Nintendo Switch. Odin uses a simple, custom Android OS experience. The setup is so easy now, just download your favorite emulators from the Google Play Store and put your ROMs on either the internal storage or micro SD card, and that's really all you have to do. Now, before I get into game emulation, let's check out some PC game streaming to the Odin Handheld, and I'm using a 5 GHz Wi-Fi connection, and for the most part it works well. This is Elden Ring, and I got quite a few stutters even at 5 megabits per second bitrate, but I can't tell if this is the game or the connection. Typically on my RTX 3070 PC, I very rarely get slowdown or stutters in this opening area, so it might be a connection or bandwidth issue. Next, I tested Cyberpunk 2077, and this runs really smooth over streaming, so it might be Elden Ring and streaming at the same time that might be causing some stutters. With Cyberpunk 2077, I'm always blown away by how good it looks, especially after playing older retro games. As a guide to help you, I've also rated them from bad, okay, good, and great. For bad, I wouldn't play them on this system. Okay is if you really have no other option. Good has some minor issues, and great runs really well. Let's talk about game emulation, and we all know 8-bit and 16-bit games run fine here, so I'll talk a little bit more about the ergonomics of the handheld. The Odin's priority is definitely games that favor an analog stick as the primary control, with the D-pad placed below that. I find it most comfortable holding the Odin on the left a little bit lower for 8-bit and 16-bit games. The only issue might be using the D-pad and the L1 button together means it's a little bit harder to reach than usual. The most glaring design issue, at least in terms of ergonomics, is the select start button placement. It's not a deal breaker, but you'd actually be surprised how many times select and start is used to get into menus, and it's just a weird reach for the right thumb. Let's talk about PSP, and I'm expecting these games to run great and look great as well, given almost every game is widescreen. All these games were tested on PPSS PP at 2x resolution. God of War Chains of Olympus is a really demanding game, but here on the Odin you can play it on standard mode. There are some dips in frame rate, but it's a great experience. Turn on performance mode and almost all the dips are gone. It's a similar story with Ghost of Sparta, and the opening section plays even better than Chains of Olympus. Outrun 2006 has some frame rate drops as it loads in new areas or traffic. On stronger hardware like the Odin or the Poco F3, the frame drop moments are reduced significantly. Siphon Filter Dark Mirror still looks great to this day. While it has problems on the Ambionic RG552 with the frame rate, it runs without issues here.
Right here.
Good job!
The next 4 games are Dreamcast games running on the Redream emulator, and I'm testing these at 1x resolution. Crazy Taxi runs perfectly and the colors really pops on the screen. Dead or Alive 2 is a favorite of mine and is a tricky one to emulate, but it runs without issue here. This is Gigawing, and I didn't encounter any slowdown even during the most demanding scenes. Tennis 2K2 plays great as well, and I haven't shown it here, but Virtua Tennis World Tour on PSP plays great too, and plays in widescreen. Gamecube games were all played on the performance setting. Given the Poco F3 with a Snapdragon 870 doesn't work well on the F-Zero GX, I wasn't expecting much here. And on the Odin, it's unplayable, ranging from 30 to 50 FPS, even after trying all the Odin performance modes. Resident Evil 4 is pretty good. There's some stutters here and there, but the performance is much improved over the PowerKitty X18S, where there was a lot of slowdown. Super Mario Sunshine had issues on the X18S, however it works really well here. This plays at a locked 30 FPS. Tony Hawk 3 had trouble on the X18S with missing textures and slowdown, but here it runs trouble free. Like Gamecube, PS2 emulation requires a performance setting, and it's possible you may even need to use the high performance setting for best results. Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition runs superbly on the Odin, running at a locked 60 FPS on the performance setting and quiet mode option. God of War 2, one of the harder games on the PS2 to emulate, does not work well even on the high performance setting. You could possibly underclock the Emotion engine here, but I think you need to jump up to a Snapdragon 870 if you want to play this smoothly. Gran Turismo 4 runs pretty well. There are some stutters and some sections of slowdown, but on the whole it runs well using the performance setting and quiet mode. Tekken 4 runs great, as does Tekken 6 on PSP. This is using the performance setting and quiet mode. Over the past 5 to 6 months, I've been non-stop testing retro handhelds from the PowerKitty X18S to the Anbernic RG552. The Odin Handheld is simply the best handheld I've tested in this time. There simply isn't another dedicated handheld that gives you this much power. And if you want more power, you really have to jump up to a mobile phone like a Poco F3, and it isn't going to be cheap either. The L1R1 button issue is perhaps the most glaring issue for people who have purchased it already, and if you haven't purchased it yet, well then there's going to be some design improvements that will hopefully make the second batch of orders a little bit better. Now the only other thing I can think of is that the select and start buttons are a little bit hard to reach on the bottom of the console there, and also if I was being picky as well on the price, I wish the Odin Base was $200 instead of $240. At $240, I feel like it is a little bit expensive, so perhaps wait and see if the Odin Lite is going to have comparable performance at $200. Okay, that's going to be it for this review. I'll have more content on the Odin handheld, including GameCube performance and PS2 performance videos, so make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.